Welcome to another tutorial with me Nagin. Today I'm going to paint some water lilies in negative painting technique using watercolors and gouache. I recommend using a cold pressed 100% cotton paper. We are going to apply many layers of paints and washes, and having a high quality watercolor paper is very important. Now I'm drawing leaves for my first layer using some mini cups. It's good to have them in different sizes to create dynamic in your painting. So one thing I want to mention about the style of this painting is that I consider this as a fairly stylized illustration. If it would be realistic, then everything would be in a either side view angle or top view angle. Right now, the way I have drawn the leaves, they are drawn in a top view angle as if you're looking at them from the top, but the flowers are in side view angle as if you're looking at them from the side. So this is something that I decided to do for this painting to add more style to it and not a very realistic approach. Now I'm using some masking fluid from Winsor and Newton. Make sure to give it a good shake before applying. So I want to preserve these areas with flowers and paint them at the end of the painting. So I applied the masking fluid to these areas and let it dry for like 10 to 15 minutes and then continue my painting. Now that masking fluid has completely dried, I will go over and apply water to the whole paper. So I use a clean wet brush to wet the whole paper and then apply my paint. This is called wet on wet technique and helps you create a smooth blurry background where colors will flow naturally and create this nice transition in the background. So I'm using some more vibrant greens together with some Prussian green, so that the painting doesn't become super flat. It's good to have some transition in darker and lighter colors. So we have to let this layer completely dry before applying the next one. I let it sit for like 1 or 2 minutes, then go over it with my hair dryer. Make sure to keep a good distance from the paper so that you don't move around pigments and water too much. And as it dries, you can move it closer to the paper. And now it has dried and has dried lighter, so watercolor usually loses some vibrancy after it has dried. That's why you work in layers and like can add more vibrancy and contrast as you go. What I'm doing right now is that I'm wetting the areas outside of these shapes, leaves and flowers, and apply paint to these areas. I'm using the same colors again, a lot of Prussian green and indigo. Also, I'm adding some indigo to add a hint of blue. So I'm painting outside of the areas instead of inside. This is the area that is called negative space, and hence why this technique is called negative painting technique. Now I will also show you how to fix mistakes. So like at this point I wasn't super careful and rushed it a bit, so I painted over these outlines. What I'm doing now is that I'm lifting up the paint using a paper towel, but if the paint has slightly dried or the paper has slightly dried, then you won't be able to lift up. So what you do is that you just go over it with a wet brush, add more water and lift up. You have to be fairly quick for this process. So I suggest giving it some exercise and like try it out a couple of times. It's very handy. Also, the paper quality is important here. So if you have a non-cotton paper, this process of correcting and lifting up paint can be harder. And I'm using a cold pressed 100% cotton in this case. Now it's time to dry this layer again and fix the mistake I made with the leaf to the left. So I'm using a smaller brush and wet it with no paint. I just wet the areas around the leaf and then I add some paint. And using a larger brush, I spread the paint so that I don't end up with these hard edges around this one leaf that is darker than the rest of the painting. So you wet the area around, add paint with a smaller brush, and spread the paint with a larger wet brush. And then I dry it again. I want this layer to be completely dried before I start adding more shapes to the background. So it's important to create overlaps if you want to have this sense of depth in your painting and create these layers. So I just use the same process and technique as before, and this time I'm adding more leaves to the background behind the ones I already have. Now using a smaller brush than I initially used. This is size 8 synthetic brush. I'm adding paint to the background again. So we have been drawing some new leaves. We want paint inside of them. We are painting outside of those leaves. And it's good to remember to rotate your paper every now and then so that your arm is resting on the table and feels comfortable when painting. I believe this is an important fact that many people don't think about, and having a relaxed arm and hand does a lot when you're painting, um, to make your painting process easier. Now I'm adding some small dots with a lemon yellow and let it spread. Since the background is wet, when I add these dots they will spread and create these glowing effects. It adds a bit to the mystery of this painting. Here I just want to mention that this kind of painting, they take a lot of time. You have to be patient. This one took around 3 to 4 hours, and I'm taking breaks in between. Sometimes I continue the next day, so I complete one layer and continue with the next layer the next day. So you don't have to do it in one sitting. It's actually important to take break and take your time. Now we let this layer completely dry, and then using a rubber eraser we can remove the masking fluid and start painting in the flowers. So as you can see, when I have removed the masking fluid, the edges are not super clean. Also, the more texture your paper has, the less clean the masking fluid will lift up from my experience. So what I do now, I do some corrections, correcting the edges, cleaning up before I add my yellow paint to the flowers. So I'm using uh, a yellow watercolor, and as you can see it's pretty transparent, and I have areas that the masking fluid didn't cover very well. I missed those spots, and for that I need a more opaque paint. That's why I'm using a yellow gouache. which is also water-based. It's not as transparent as watercolors, and you can use it in combination with watercolors if you want to have areas with more opaque paint to like cover up and adding maybe lighter colors. So that's what I'm doing right now. I first cover the layer of flowers with yellow watercolors and then go over it with yellow gouache to cover any spots that I have blue paint on. Now I'm painting a little dragonfly in the open area I have sort of in the middle. I'm using gold watercolors from Fintech, and so I will paint two wings to start with, let it dry, and paint another wing which overlaps with the larger one. This way you can create some sort of transparency. So whenever you want to create transparency in watercolors, paint a layer lightly, don't add too much pigment, let it dry, and paint over another light layer on top of it, so overlapping, to create this sense of transparency or translucency. I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial so far. If you did, please consider giving a thumbs up to support this channel so I can make more videos for you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to share them with me in the comment section below or on my Instagram account, which is linked in the description.